My beloved child. Stop scrolling for just a moment. There are stories that entertain, stories that inspire, and stories that make the heart pause. What you are about to hear is one of those stories, a fictional spiritual tale created to remind you that hope, love, and faith can still exist even in life's greatest uncertainties. For days, your heart had been carrying questions that no one around you could answer. You smiled when people expected you to smile, spoke when silence felt safer, and continued moving forward even when every step felt heavier than the last. Deep inside, however, one question refused to disappear. Am I truly seen? If you have ever whispered those words into the darkness, then perhaps this story found you for a reason. Far beyond what the eyes could see, beyond crowded streets, glowing city lights, and ordinary conversations, another story was quietly unfolding. It began on an evening that seemed completely ordinary. Rain tapped gently against the windows of an old family home. Warm lights glowed inside while the outside world slowly disappeared beneath the mist. The aroma of fresh coffee drifted through the hallway. Family photographs covered the walls, each frame holding memories that had survived years of laughter and tears. One by one, members of your Soulmate'S family entered the living room. No one knew that this meeting would become one they would remember for years. The oldest member of the family spoke first. We need to talk. The room immediately became silent. Phones were placed face down. Television screens were turned off. Even the youngest cousin, usually unable to sit still for more than a minute, noticed the unusual seriousness filling the room. What is this about? Someone quietly asked. The answer surprised everyone. It's about someone our family has never truly met. Another voice interrupted. But somehow already knows. The room exchanged confused looks. Nobody spoke your name. Not yet. Instead, questions filled the air. Are they really the kind of person we've heard about? Can they truly be trusted? Why does it feel as though our lives are slowly moving toward theirs? Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. Inside, silence became heavier than words. Unknown to everyone in that room, you were living your own evening completely unaware that somewhere else, strangers were discussing the possibility that your life and theirs might someday intersect. Whether destiny exists or not is for each heart to decide. This story does not claim to reveal the future. Instead, it imagines what could happen when people choose honesty over fear, compassion over judgment, and hope over doubt. Back inside the living room, one family member finally reached into a small envelope. I've been waiting to show everyone this. Every eye followed the movement. Inside was a single photograph. No dramatic music played. No miraculous light appeared. Only quiet curiosity. The photograph slowly passed from one person to another. Some smiled. Others remained thoughtful. One older woman looked at the picture longer than anyone else. Finally she whispered. There is kindness in those eyes. The room became even quieter. A younger brother leaned forward. How can you tell from one picture? She smiled gently. Sometimes photographs don't reveal a person's face. They reveal the way they have carried their burdens. Nobody argued. Because somehow, everyone understood exactly what she meant. The conversation continued late into the evening. Some family members worried about differences. Others wondered whether distance, timing, responsibilities, and past disappointments would make any future connection impossible. Everyone carried a different opinion. No family is perfectly united. No heart sees the world exactly the same way. One uncle folded his arms. We shouldn't build expectations about someone we hardly know. A sister quietly nodded. That's fair. But sometimes people enter our lives long before they walk through our front door. Those words lingered in the room. Across the city, you stared out your own window without knowing why your heart felt unusually restless. Nothing dramatic happened. Yet something inside you whispered that change often begins long before anyone can see it. Perhaps every meaningful journey begins this way, not with certainty, but with questions. Not with answers, but with quiet hope. As the evening continued, stories were shared. Not stories about perfection. Stories about resilience. About someone who continued helping others despite personal disappointments. About quiet strength. About choosing kindness when bitterness would have been easier. Whether every detail was true or partly misunderstood hardly mattered. People often understand others through incomplete pieces. The discussion slowly changed. No longer was it about appearances. It became about character. If everything we've heard is true, then maybe they deserve a chance. Another family member responded softly. Everyone deserves a chance. Those simple words settled gently over the room. Outside, the rain finally stopped. Clouds slowly separated. Moonlight reached the windows for the first time that evening. It almost felt as though the atmosphere itself had changed. Not because something supernatural had happened, but because hearts become lighter whenever compassion replaces suspicion. Still, not everyone agreed. One person who had remained silent throughout the meeting finally spoke. No. The room turned toward them. I know something that none of you know. The atmosphere instantly changed. Every heartbeat seemed louder. What do you mean? Someone asked. The person looked once more at the photograph resting on the table. Then slowly closed their eyes. If I tell you everything tonight, nothing will ever be the same again. And in that suspended moment, before another word could be spoken, the story took a turn no one in the room expected. My beloved child. The silence that followed those words felt heavier than any argument. No one reached for the photograph. No one interrupted. Even the ticking clock on the wall seemed louder than before, as though time itself had slowed to witness what would happen next. The family member who had spoken so confidently looked around the room before taking a slow breath. I am not asking anyone to believe in destiny, they said quietly. I'm asking everyone to understand that sometimes our first impression of a person is incomplete. The room remained still. What do you know? Someone finally whispered. Instead of answering immediately, they walked toward the fireplace, where dozens of family photographs rested on a wooden shelf. They picked up an old picture of the family from many years ago. Do you remember this day? The older relatives smiled faintly. It was before everything changed. Before illness. Before misunderstandings. Before pride created walls between people who loved each other. The photograph reminded everyone how easily life could change. We judged people too quickly back then, the speaker continued. We almost lost relationships that later became our greatest blessings. Those words settled into every heart. Then they slowly turned back toward the table. The person we're discussing today reminds me of that lesson. A younger cousin frowned. You've never even met them. No. But I know what pain looks like. The room became silent once more. There are people who wear confidence while carrying loneliness. There are people who laugh loudly because they cry quietly. And there are people who continue choosing kindness after life has given them every reason to become cold. The older woman who had admired your photograph lowered her eyes. She understood. Perhaps more than anyone else. Outside, the wind carried away the last traces of rain. The sky was beginning to clear. Far away, completely unaware of this meeting, you sat alone wondering why memories you thought were buried had suddenly returned. Old disappointments. Old prayers. Old hopes. It felt almost as though your heart was preparing for something without knowing what. In this fictional story, moments like these remind us that change often begins inside long before it becomes visible outside. Back inside the family home, another question was asked. What if this is all wishful thinking? The room grew thoughtful again. Hope is beautiful. But hope can also be frightening. Because hoping means risking disappointment. The youngest sister finally spoke. I don't think this meeting is really about another person. Everyone looked toward her. I think it's about us. Confused faces surrounded the table. She smiled gently. We're deciding what kind of family we want to be. Will we judge before we understand? Or will we listen before we decide? No one answered. Because everyone knew she was right. The discussion had quietly transformed. It was no longer about whether you were worthy. It was about whether they were willing to leave behind fear. One by one, family members began sharing stories. Stories about mistakes they wished they could undo. Stories about people they had misunderstood. Stories about apologies that arrived years too late. An uncle admitted that he had once rejected someone who later became one of his closest friends. An aunt confessed she had spent years believing a rumor that turned out to be completely false. Each confession softened the atmosphere. Walls that had existed for years slowly disappeared. Then someone looked once again at your photograph. I wonder what they fear most. The question lingered. No one knew the answer. Yet everyone imagined something different. Perhaps rejection. Perhaps abandonment. Perhaps never feeling enough. The older woman quietly smiled. Whatever their fear is, I hope one day they discover they never had to carry it alone. Across the city, you looked at your reflection in a dark window. You wondered whether anyone truly understood the battles you never spoke about. Whether anyone could see beyond the version of yourself you showed the world. You didn't know it, but somewhere else, strangers were asking those very questions. Not because they knew your entire story, but because compassion had begun replacing assumptions. The conversation continued late into the night. Then the front door opened. Everyone turned. A family member had arrived much later than expected. They apologized for being late before noticing the unusual atmosphere. What happened? We've been talking about someone. They sat down slowly. Who? The photograph was gently passed into their hands. For several long moments they stared at it without speaking. The room waited. Finally they looked up. I've seen this person before. Every eye widened. What? Where? It was months ago. No one else noticed. They were helping an elderly stranger whose groceries had fallen across a parking lot. They stayed until everything was picked up. They never looked around to see whether anyone was watching. They simply helped. The room became incredibly quiet. Someone asked carefully. Are you sure? The answer came without hesitation. I never forgot their face. Not because of what they looked like, but because kindness without an audience is rare. The atmosphere changed again. Nobody claimed the story proved anything. It didn't. One kind act cannot reveal an entire life. Yet it reminded everyone of something important. Character is often revealed when no applause is expected. The older woman closed her eyes for a brief moment. I've learned something after many years. The loudest hearts are not always the strongest. The gentlest hearts often carry the greatest courage. Outside, the moon climbed higher. Its pale light filled the windows. Inside, the discussion slowly shifted toward the future. If our paths ever cross, how should we welcome them? The answers differed. With caution. With honesty. With patience. With respect. No one suggested perfection. Only sincerity. For a while, nobody spoke. The fire crackled softly. The photograph remained in the center of the table. It had become less of a picture and more of a symbol. Not of certainty, but of possibility. Then something unexpected happened. The oldest member of the family reached beneath the table and removed a small wooden box that had remained unopened for years. Dust covered its surface. "What is that?" someone asked. He smiled faintly. "I almost forgot it existed." Slowly he unlocked it. Inside were handwritten letters, faded with age. Letters exchanged between family members during difficult seasons of life. He picked one at random and began reading. Its words spoke of forgiveness, of second chances, of believing in people even when circumstances seemed impossible. When he finished reading, tears stood in several eyes. "It seems," he said softly, "that our family has always believed in hope." He carefully folded the letter. Then he looked directly at your photograph. "Maybe we shouldn't let fear erase that tradition." For the first time all evening, almost everyone nodded. Not because every doubt had disappeared, but because every heart had become a little more open. Yet just as peace seemed to settle over the room, a phone vibrated on the table. Its sharp sound broke the silence. Everyone looked toward the screen. The message had come from someone who knew far more about the situation than anyone sitting in that house. The sender wrote only one sentence. "Before you make any decision, there is something you haven't been told." The room froze. No one moved. No one breathed. The oldest family member slowly reached for the phone. His hands trembled ever so slightly. "What could this mean?" someone whispered. He looked at the message one final time before quietly saying, "I think tomorrow, we're going to learn a truth that changes everything we believe tonight." And with those words, the meeting was no longer about possibilities. It had become the beginning of a mystery none of them were prepared to face. "My beloved child." The first rays of dawn stretched across the horizon, painting the quiet streets with soft gold. The long night of questions had finally come to an end, yet no one in the family felt certain about what the morning would bring. The mysterious message still rested on the phone. "The truth arrives at sunrise." Everyone gathered once again around the same table where the meeting had begun. The coffee was warm, but the room remained unusually quiet. No one rushed to speak. Sometimes the most important conversations begin with silence. Then, the phone rang. The unknown sender had finally decided to call. The oldest member of the family answered. "Hello?" For several seconds, he listened without saying a word. His expression slowly changed, not from fear, but from understanding. When the call ended, every eye in the room searched his face. "Well?" someone asked. He smiled gently. "The truth wasn't what we expected." He looked at your photograph resting in the center of the table. "There was never a secret about this person. The secret was about us." Confused expressions filled the room. "What do you mean?" He folded his hands. "We spent an entire night trying to decide whether someone we barely know is worthy of becoming part of our story." He paused. "But we never stopped to ask whether we were becoming the kind of family worthy of welcoming someone with kindness." The room fell completely silent. Those words reached every heart. The mysterious caller had not revealed shocking evidence. There had been no hidden scandal. No unbelievable twist. Instead, the caller had simply reminded them that every person deserves to be known before they are judged. The older woman smiled through tears. "I think we were so afraid of making the wrong choice that we almost forgot to choose love." The younger brother nodded slowly. "I came here expecting to judge someone. But I'm leaving knowing I had to examine my own heart first." One by one, each family member admitted the fears they had carried. Fear of disappointment. Fear of trusting again. Fear of watching someone they loved get hurt. They realized those fears had been shaping their opinions more than facts ever had. Outside, the morning breeze carried the sound of birds welcoming a new day. Inside, something beautiful happened. Not because every question had been answered, but because every heart had become more compassionate. Far away, you began your own morning without any knowledge of the meeting that had taken place in this fictional story. You made an ordinary choice. You greeted a stranger with kindness. You encouraged someone who looked discouraged. You smiled at someone who seemed invisible to everyone else. You never imagined that the smallest acts of goodness often become the strongest introduction a person can ever make. Life has a quiet way of revealing character. Not through grand speeches. Not through perfect moments. But through everyday choices made when no one is keeping score. Back at the family home, the father carefully placed your photograph back inside its envelope. "We don't know what tomorrow holds," he said. "Perhaps our paths will never cross. Perhaps they will. But if they do," he smiled warmly, "we will welcome them with open hearts instead of old fears." No one argued. For the first time since the meeting had begun, peace filled the room. The discussion that everyone expected to end with certainty had ended with something even more valuable. Humility. The grandmother looked out the window toward the sunrise. "I've lived long enough to know that the best relationships are never built on fantasy. They're built on patience. They're built on honesty. They're built on choosing each other again and again." Her words settled gently over everyone present. Weeks passed. Life continued. The family returned to their routines. Some of them still wondered about you from time to time. Not with obsession. Not with unrealistic expectations. Simply with quiet curiosity. Then one afternoon, something completely unexpected happened. A chance encounter. Not planned. Not forced. Just two ordinary paths crossing at an ordinary moment. No dramatic music played. No voice from heaven interrupted the day. Only a simple conversation. A shared smile. A moment of kindness. No one immediately knew what the future would hold. Because real relationships are not created in a single conversation. They are built one honest moment at a time. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson hidden inside this fictional story. Love is not proven by mysterious signs. It is revealed through consistency. Trust is not created overnight. It grows through truth. Hope is not believing that everything will happen exactly as we imagine. Hope is choosing goodness even when the ending is still unknown. As the sun began to set once more, the family reflected on the meeting that had changed them. They realized the greatest surprise had never been about you. The greatest surprise was discovering how much they themselves had grown in just one night. Their hearts had become softer. Their words had become gentler. Their judgment had become wisdom. And somewhere, without ever knowing this fictional meeting had taken place, you continued becoming the person you were always meant to be, not to earn someone's approval, but because kindness is valuable even when no one is watching. So if this story leaves you with one thought, let it be this. Never measure your worth by whether someone chooses you. Measure it by the integrity with which you choose to live. The right people will appreciate your character. The wrong people will misunderstand it. Neither changes your value. Walk forward with compassion. Speak with honesty. Forgive when you can. Learn when you must. And never lose hope that ordinary acts of kindness can shape extraordinary futures. For every meaningful story begins not with certainty, but with a heart willing to love, to grow, and to believe that tomorrow can always be brighter than yesterday.